Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us where you watched in the comments. The whistle of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe engine split the still desert air as the train ground to a stop at Dry Creek Station, Arizona Territory, 1878. A cloud of rust-red dust rose, clinging to the sunburnt faces of the crowd gathered on the platform. The West was changing. The railroad had dragged the world closer. Yet for some, it only deepened the distance between what they longed for and what they carried inside. From the last carriage stepped Taya Nez, an Apache woman with broad shoulders and a tall frame that seemed almost too large for the narrow planks beneath her boots. In one hand she gripped a battered suitcase. In the other she clutched a small string of beaded turquoise, the last gift from her mother before the reservation days scattered their people. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd with a fragile flame of hope. After years of wandering, perhaps here, in this dusty town carved out of the frontier, a husband and a home would be waiting. She saw him then, Caleb Morton, the young merchant who had written those letters, promising companionship and a new beginning. But as his gaze fell on her, no welcome stirred in his eyes. He looked her up and down, the proud figure, the muscles carved by hard years of survival, the strength she could never hide. His mouth curled into a bitter laugh that cut sharper than any blade. "I thought I was marrying a lady of refinement," he said, loud enough for every ear on the platform. "Instead, I got a woman built like a man. No one could ever call that a wife." The word struck like gunfire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few townsfolk chuckled. One child, emboldened, pointed and cried out, "Look, it's the giant woman!" Laughter rolled across the platform, dry and cruel as the desert wind. Taya froze. The handle of her suitcase dug into her palm as her hand trembled. Her throat burned with the ache of unshed tears, but she forced her chin upward, though her heart was breaking. Every mile she had traveled, every whispered dream of belonging, crumbled in an instant under the weight of ridicule. Caleb turned his back without hesitation, disappearing into the dust. The crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing with mockery, leaving Taya standing alone, her shadow stretching long in the late sun. The once bright hope inside her flickered weakly, as though the whole world had cast her aside. And yet, unseen by most, another pair of eyes watched quietly from the edge of the platform. Gray, weathered eyes that had endured both war and loss. But his time to step forward had not yet come. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. The platform grew quiet as the last laughter faded into the dusty wind. Taya sank onto a wooden bench, her suitcase resting at her feet. The boards creaked beneath her weight, as though even the station itself groaned at her presence. She pressed her palms against her knees, shoulders hunched, the turquoise beads of her necklace slipping between her fingers like the last remnants of dignity. The sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the platform. A few townsfolk lingered, whispering, their eyes darting at her with the same mixture of pity and scorn that had followed her all her life. She had seen that look before, on the reservation, among settlers, even within her own people, who had cast her aside as too different, too strange. Alone once more, she felt the sharp edge of humiliation gnawing at her spirit. A gust of desert wind swept across Dry Creek, carrying grit into her eyes. She blinked back tears, unwilling to let them fall where strangers could see. She thought of turning back, of boarding the train when it rolled east again, but the thought died as quickly as it came. She had no coin, no family waiting, nowhere left in the wide world to call her own. Then the murmur ceased. The platform grew still, as though some invisible weight pressed upon it. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, broad in frame, his leather coat worn from years of dust and work. His face was weathered, marked by lines of both sun and sorrow. Elias Ward, the rancher who kept to himself, whose presence alone silenced quarrels in town. A man known not for laughter or charm, but for a steady hand and a life carved by loss. He watched her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Taya tensed under his gaze, suspicion flickering like a cornered animal. Was this another man come to mock her? To claim her as property? But when he stepped forward, the crowd instinctively parted. Boots thudded against the boards, slow and deliberate, until he stopped before her. For an instant, silence hung between them, the whole town waiting for his words. He offered none of pity, none of judgment. His voice, roughened by years of dust and solitude, carried only three. "Come with me." Taya blinked, stunned. She searched his eyes for malice, for mockery, for the hunger she had come to expect. Instead, she found only stillness, as steady as the stone cliffs beyond the desert. Without another word, he bent, lifted her heavy suitcase with one hand, and turned toward the road leading west. His steps were slow but certain, the stride of a man accustomed to walking alone. For a heartbeat, Taya sat frozen, torn between doubt and desperate hope. Then, with the crowd's eyes still burning against her back, she rose. Each step behind him felt like walking into the unknown, but it was a path better than the dust of the bench where shame had left her. As the sun bled into the horizon, they left Dry Creek Station behind, two shadows crossing into a wilderness where the future waited, unseen. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The ride west from Dry Creek carried them into silence. Elias rode his chestnut gelding, reins loose in his hand, while Taya walked beside him, the dust stinging her bare feet. The sun dipped low across the desert, spilling fire across the horizon, and each mile seemed to stretch longer than the last. She asked no questions, and he offered no words. Only the creak of saddle leather and the steady rhythm of hooves broke the emptiness between them. By the time the prairie surrendered to shadow, a small cabin appeared against the rising hills. Its roof sagged in places, the fence leaned, and the barn was quiet, as though it too had forgotten laughter. Smoke trailed weakly from a chimney where a fire still smoldered. This was no grand estate, just a lonely patch of land carved out of dust and stubborn will. A dog stirred from beneath the porch as they approached, an old shepherd with gray fur and tired eyes. It barked once, then wagged its tail slowly, recognizing its master. Elias dismounted, tied his horse to the post, and lifted Taya's suitcase as if it weighed nothing. He pushed the cabin door open, the hinges groaning with disuse. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and earth. A Bible lay on the rough-hewn table, its leather cracked, the edges of its pages worn thin. Beside it sat a pipe and a tin cup, the relics of a man who lived with ghosts. Elias set the suitcase down in the corner and gestured toward the narrow bed along the wall. "There's room here. If you leave, do it in the morning. If you stay, live like a human being." His words were plain, without softness, yet they carried no cruelty. Then, without waiting for reply, he moved toward the hearth, feeding another log into the fire. The glow lit his weathered face, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Taya stood at the threshold for a long moment. Suspicion gnawed at her. Was this another trap, another mockery waiting to spring? But there was no hunger in his gaze, no laughter, only the stillness of stone. Slowly, she stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her weight, and she touched the blanket folded at the end of the bed. It was patched in places, worn but clean, carrying the faint scent of sunlight. That night, Taya lay on the hard mattress with the blanket pulled over her shoulders. Through the crack in the door, she saw Elias sitting by the fire, silent, as if carved from the same wood as the chair beneath him.
He did not look at her. He smoked his pipe in stillness, the red ember pulsing faintly in the dark. For the first time in many years, she slept beneath a roof without fear of being driven out before dawn. Dreams did not chase her that night, only the low murmur of wind through the grass and the steady crackle of fire in the hearth. The loneliness of the world had not left her, but something in the quiet of that cabin was different, less cruel, less cold. And in the stillness she clutched the turquoise beads around her neck, whispering a prayer she had not spoken in years, unsure if any god still listened. The next morning dawned pale and cold, the light creeping through the cracks of the cabin's shutters.
Taya stirred awake to the sound of roosters crowing and the scrape of boots on wooden floorboards. Elias was already up, his movements steady, as though sleep had little claim on him. Smoke curled from the chimney where he stoked the fire, and the scent of beans simmering filled the air. He said nothing when she entered the small kitchen. Instead, he pushed a bowl across the table, thick with bean soup, then turned back to slice strips of cured meat. His silence was not dismissive, but simply the habit of a man who had lived too long without company. Taya ate in quiet, the warmth of the food settling deep into her stomach. She had known hunger often enough that even the simplest meal carried weight. When she glanced at Elias, she found him not watching her, but tending to his knife, the blade scraping clean against a whetstone. There was no contempt in his eyes, no mocking smirk, just a man lost in the rhythm of work. After breakfast, Elias stepped outside to tend the horse. Taya remained behind, uncertain of her place, the silence pressing heavy. The cabin was plain, worn by years of wind and dust. A chair sat crooked near the window, the curtain threadbare and flapping at the edges.
The floor carried a layer of grit, scattered by boots and dogs and time. She picked up a broom leaning against the wall. No one asked her, yet her hands moved with quiet determination. Dust swirled as she swept, the bristles scratching against the floorboards. She straightened the crooked chair, patched the curtain with a scrap of cloth pulled from her own dress hem, and placed Elias's Bible neatly back on the table where it had been left the night before. Each small task steadied her, a silent plea to prove she was not useless. Outside, Elias returned with the horse brushed and watered. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. She did not notice him at first. Her head bent low as she swept, her black hair falling loose across her shoulders. A low sound rose from her lips, not words, but melody. A song, old and broken, drifting from her tribe's past. It was not sung for others, but for herself, soft as a prayer. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He did not interrupt, did not speak, only listened. The tune wound its way through the cabin, weaving with the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind against the eaves. To him, it sounded less like music and more like memory, something carried through generations, stitched into the fabric of her being. When the last note faded, she lifted her head and found him standing there. For a moment, her body stiffened, shame creeping in for having revealed something so private. But Elias's expression held no mockery. His gray eyes were calm, steady, carrying neither pity nor ridicule. He gave a single nod, then set a bundle of firewood by the hearth. Neither spoke. Yet in the silence, something shifted. The cabin, once a place of loneliness, now carried the faintest echo of belonging. By the week's end, Elias harnessed his wagon to make the long trip into Dry Creek. Supplies were running thin: salt, nails, seed packets for spring planting. He motioned for Taya to join him, and though doubt flickered in her eyes, she climbed onto the wagon's wooden bench beside him. The road wound across open prairie, the wheels groaning against ruts carved by years of use. Taya sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Dry Creek stirred with life when they arrived. Horses tied along the hitching posts stamped against the dust, and the blacksmith's hammer rang sharp against iron.
Children darted between wagons, and women carried baskets of goods from the general store. Yet, as Elias guided the wagon into town, conversation slowed, faces turned, whispers chased them through the street like shadows. There she is, the giant Apache woman. Living under his roof, no shame in it? The words hissed from corners, cruel and cutting. Taya's shoulders tightened. She lowered her gaze, clutching the edge of her dress until her knuckles whitened. The sting of humiliation pressed heavy against her chest, each whisper another weight she could not throw off. She had known rejection before, but to face it here, in open daylight, stripped her dignity bare. Elias halted the wagon in front of the mercantile. He climbed down, his boots striking hard against the boards. Then, without pause, he turned and reached his hand up toward her. The gesture was simple, ordinary to anyone else, yet it struck the air like a thunderclap. Taya froze. Every eye in Dry Creek seemed to bore into her, waiting for her to shrink back, to prove she was as unwanted as they said.
Slowly, she lifted her gaze to Elias. His gray eyes were steady, unflinching, not asking but offering. She placed her hand in his. He helped her down, but when her feet touched the ground, he did not let go. His rough fingers remained wrapped around hers as they walked together through the mercantile door. Murmurs swelled in their wake, shock rippling across the crowd. For the first time in her life, someone had not hidden her in the shadows. Someone had chosen to stand beside her in plain sight. Inside, the shopkeeper cleared his throat, flustered by the silence that clung to the room. Elias ordered nails, seed packets, and salt as though nothing unusual had transpired. Taya stood at his side, her tall frame casting a shadow across the shelves of canned peaches and flour sacks. She did not speak, but in her chest a spark flickered, fragile yet fierce. As they stepped back into the street, Elias's voice rumbled low, more to himself than to her. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. The words lingered in the air, heavy and defiant.
For Taya, they felt less like scripture and more like a shield laid gently across her wounded heart. The days after the market passed with a rhythm both simple and unfamiliar. The prairie stretched wide under a burning sky, and each sunrise brought the same duties: horses to tend, fences to mend, wood to split. Yet beneath the plain routine, something unspoken began to shift within the cabin walls. One afternoon, Elias noticed Taya favoring her left arm as she carried a bundle of kindling from the yard. She tried to hide it, but the stiffness in her movements betrayed her. When she set the wood down by the hearth, he reached out, gently taking hold of her forearm. A long, pale scar crossed her skin, the remnants of some older wound. The flesh around it was swollen, bruised from fresh strain. She tensed, black eyes flashing with suspicion, ready to pull away. Elias did not press her. He simply let out a slow breath and turned to the cupboard. From a tin box, he drew a bundle of dried herbs. He ground them with the handle of his knife, poured hot water over the mixture, and wrapped the pulp in a strip of cloth. Then, without a word, he pressed the poultice to her arm. The scent of sage and willow bark filled the room. Taya winced at first but did not move. Her gaze lifted to his, searching for mockery, for the smirk she had always found in others. Instead, she saw only patience. The roughness of his hands told of battles fought and work endured, but his touch carried no cruelty. For the first time, she allowed herself to sit still while another cared for her. That evening, as dusk bled across the prairie, Taya placed a pot on the stove. She worked clumsily with what little the cupboard held: beans, salt pork, wild onions gathered from the field. The fire hissed as she stirred, smoke curling into her face. She had never cooked in such a kitchen, but determination steadied her hands. When she set the stew before him, Elias studied the bowl for a long moment. The spoon clinked softly as he tasted. Then he nodded once. Good.
No more words followed, but the small praise settled in her chest like a glowing coal. She ate too, though the flavor mattered less than the quiet between them. The silence no longer pressed heavy. It breathed, alive with something fragile. Later, they sat across from one another at the wooden table. The oil lamp burned low, throwing golden light across his sun-worn face and her scarred hands. Elias smoked his pipe, gaze turned toward the window where night gathered. Taya sat with her back straight, her necklace of turquoise beads catching the flicker of flame. Neither spoke. Yet in the stillness, something passed between them. A recognition, not of shared words, but of shared solitude. Two lives scarred by loss, now tethered by simple gestures. A poultice, a bowl of stew, the patience of silence. The prairie outside howled with wind, but within the cabin the air carried a softer weight. For the first time, Taya felt the faint outline of belonging take shape. Fragile as the flame of the oil lamp, but steady against the dark. Word traveled quickly in Dry Creek. A week after the market, whispers spread like wildfire about the Apache woman who now lived on Elias Ward's ranch, about the rancher himself walking openly beside her, hand in hand, unashamed. Some scoffed, some laughed, but not everyone found it amusing. At the far end of the saloon, beneath the haze of smoke and the clatter of poker chips, Emory Granger nursed a glass of whiskey. His face burned as though every whisper were a brand pressed against his skin. Once he had been the man expecting a wife from the East, letters exchanged, arrangements made. Now, in the eyes of the town, he was the fool who lost her, upstaged by a reclusive rancher. He slammed the glass down, amber liquid sloshing across the table. "He stole her right out from under me," he muttered, his voice thick with drink and bitterness. "Made me a laughingstock in front of the whole damn town." Across from him sat Jeb Mullen, a brute of a man with hands like mallets and scars carved deep across his jaw. His grin showed broken teeth, and his eyes glittered with a hunger for violence. He leaned back in his chair, boots thudding against the floorboards. "Then take her back," Jeb growled. "If a man lets himself be shamed once, he'll be shamed forever, unless he puts things right." Emory's lips twisted. "You think Elias Ward will hand her over? He's no fool. That man's dangerous, steady as iron. People respect him, even fear him." Jeb spat into the sawdust on the floor. "Respect doesn't stop bullets. One old rancher and one oversized woman, that's all he's got. Me and a couple boys can handle that." The saloon's piano faltered under the tension. A few men at nearby tables leaned closer, hungry for gossip, but careful not to draw attention. Emory lowered his voice, his face pale with anger. "I want her brought back. Not just for me, but so every soul in this town knows I wasn't bested by the likes of him. If she stays with Ward, I'll never live it down. I'll be a joke until the day I die." Jeb's grin widened. "Then let me handle it. We'll wait until the old man's out tending stock. Slip in, drag her back, and burn that shack of his to the ground. Simple." Emory hesitated, the whiskey burning in his throat. The thought of Elias Ward standing tall beside her, unshaken by the town's laughter, festered in his pride like a wound. Slowly, he nodded. "Not yet," he said. "We wait. But soon, and when we do, the whole valley will know who she belongs to." Jeb raised his glass, the lamplight glinting off the scars in his face. "To settle in scores." The glasses clinked, and the deal was sealed. Outside, the night wind swept through Dry Creek, rattling shutters and carrying the promise of violence yet to come. The days lengthened as autumn winds swept across the prairie. The air grew sharper, carrying with it the smell of dry grass and the warning of colder nights to come. Work pressed heavy on the ranch. Fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, and winter would show no mercy if repairs were left undone. Elias carried a hammer and nails to the far pasture, where the fence had bowed beneath years of storms. He expected to work alone, as he always had. But when he turned, he saw Taya walking steadily behind him, a coil of rope over one shoulder, her tall frame outlined against the horizon. "You don't have to," he said gruffly, though his voice lacked conviction. Her reply was simple, "I want to." Together they lifted the heavy posts, driving them into the stubborn earth. Elias swung the hammer, muscles straining, while Taya held the beams in place with a strength that surprised even him. Sweat darkened her simple dress, and dirt streaked across her arms, but her eyes burned with quiet determination. For once, her size and power were not the cause of ridicule. They were exactly what was needed. At midday they rested, sitting side by side on the fence line. The prairie stretched endless around them, grass bending in waves beneath the wind. Taya drew a flask of water from her satchel and offered it to Elias. He hesitated, then took it. Their hands brushed, calloused against calloused, and for the first time he allowed himself the faintest smile. It startled her. She blinked, then let out a low laugh, rough at first, like a sound she had forgotten how to make. It slipped free before she could stop it, carried away by the wind across the fields. Elias turned his head, the corner of his mouth twitching, as though that small burst of joy had cracked something inside him long sealed. That night, back at the cabin, they worked in rhythm, Elias chopping wood, Taya stacking it neatly against the wall. The fire in the hearth burned bright, its glow flickering across the walls. No words were needed. Each action flowed into the next, like two halves of the same pattern finally finding fit. But beyond the fence line, the prairie carried other sounds, the rumble of wagon wheels, the distant bark of drunken laughter. In the saloon at Dry Creek, Emery Granger's fury festered deeper with every drink, while Jeb Mullen gathered men hungry for coin and chaos. Their plan was no longer talk. It had begun to take shape, dark as the storm clouds brewing in the valley. As Taya lay down that night beneath the patchwork blanket, her body sore but her heart strangely light, she whispered to herself words she scarcely believed. "This place, it feels almost like home." Yet outside, in the cold sweep of desert night, shadows moved, carrying with them the weight of hatred, pride, and fire. The peace within the cabin was real, but it would not last. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. The prairie was unnaturally quiet that night. A crescent moon hung low over the horizon, its silver glow stretching thin across the grasslands. The wind whispered against the fences, carrying with it the scent of dust and something darker, like the breath of a storm waiting just beyond the ridge. Elias sat on the porch with his Winchester propped against the doorframe. Smoke curled from the bowl of his pipe, fading into the cool air. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, while Taya sharpened her long Apache knife, the stone rasping softly with each stroke. The dog, old and scarred from years of guarding, shifted uneasily, ears twitching toward the distant dark. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a low thud carried on the wind. Hooves, more than one, steady, deliberate, closing in. Elias's jaw tightened. He tapped the pipe out against the railing and set it aside. The dog growled low, a rumble that rose into a bark sharp enough to split the silence. Taya froze, her knife still in her hand, eyes narrowing toward the window. "They're here," Elias said, his voice flat as stone. Even before the words left his mouth, the first shot cracked the night. A bullet slammed through the window, shattering glass into glittering shards. Sparks flew as it bit deep into the cabin's beam. Taya dropped low, instincts firing. She snatched the short carbine from its place near the stove, pressed the stock to her shoulder, and crouched by the hearth. Outside, shadows shifted in the moonlight, riders circling, guns glinting as they moved. Another shot rang out, splintering the porch post inches from Elias's head. He did not flinch. With the calm precision of a man who had faced death before, he raised the Winchester, sighted into the dark, and fired. The recoil echoed like thunder across the open land. A cry broke from the shadows, one rider thrown from his saddle. The rest shouted in reply, their voices coarse with hatred and whiskey. The dog barked furiously, teeth bared, hackles raised, as if he too understood the night had turned to war. Taya's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It had become a fortress, its thin walls trembling beneath the rain of bullets. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to vanish into the desert as she had done so many times before. But when she glanced at Elias, standing firm on the porch, gray eyes hard and unyielding, something rooted her feet to the ground. There was no turning back, not tonight. She drew in a breath, pressed her cheek against the worn wood of the carbine, and fired into the dark. The crack split the night, and for the first time, she was not the hunted. She was standing her ground. Gunfire tore through the night, each report echoing off the hills like rolling thunder. The attackers fanned out across the yard, their silhouettes darting between fence posts and wagon shadows. Elias stood firm in the doorway, Winchester braced tight against his shoulder. He moved with the precision of long habit. Aim, fire, reload. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Each shot struck close enough to force the enemy back, carving fear into their drunken bravado. Taya crouched by the hearth, breath sharp in her chest. The carbine felt heavy in her hands at first, but the weight steadied her. She had been taught long ago, before exile and humiliation, when her uncle had pressed a bow into her grip and told her the desert would not forgive the unready. That memory surged now, not as sorrow, but as strength. Through the shattered window she glimpsed a rider sliding from his horse, revolver blazing. She lifted the carbine, cheek tight to the stock, and squeezed. The man spun sideways with a shout, his weapon clattering into the dirt. The recoil kicked against her shoulder, but she did not flinch. Elias glanced over his shoulder, gray eyes meeting hers for the briefest second. He gave a single nod, not surprise, not command, but respect. Then he turned back and fired again, dropping another shadow that had crept too close to the barn. The attackers howled curses, bullets slamming into the cabin's walls. Splinters showered across the room. The oil lamp rattled where it hung, flame flickering dangerously. Taya dropped flat as glass rained from the window frame, heart pounding but hands steady. A voice roared from the dark, Jeb Mullen's gravel-thick growl. "Hand the woman over, Ward! End this before we burn you out!" Elias answered with another shot, the bullet sparking against Jeb's axe blade as he raised it like a shield. His voice carried cold and clear through the chaos. "She belongs to no man, least of all you." The words cut deeper than the bullet. For Taya, crouched in the firelight, they rang like a vow spoken before God. No one had ever stood for her that way. Another rider charged the porch, revolver spitting flame. Elias swung the Winchester and fired point blank. The man toppled backward, boots kicking against the dirt before falling still. The dog lunged from the porch, snarling, driving back another who had crept too close. Taya rose from her crouch, teeth gritted. The carbine barked in her hands again, and another shadow reeled away clutching his arm. Her blood burned, not with fear, but with something fiercer. She was no longer the abandoned woman on the platform, mocked and cast aside. Tonight, she was fighting beside a man who refused to turn his back.
The gunfire raged on, sparks flying, smoke filling the air, until the night itself seemed aflame. But inside the cabin, two figures stood shoulder to shoulder. Elias with his steady rifle, and Taya with the fire of a warrior reignited. The standoff broke when a torch arced through the night sky. It spun end over end before smashing against the barn's roof. Dry thatch caught instantly, flames licking upward in hungry tongues. Within moments, fire spread across the rafters, casting the entire yard in a savage orange glow. The cattle inside bellowed in terror. Hooves pounded against the stalls, wood splintering under their frenzy. Smoke poured into the sky, thick and choking, the smell of burning hay mingling with gunpowder. The attackers shouted with wild laughter, emboldened by the destruction.
Elias's face hardened, the firelight carving deep lines into his weathered skin. "They'll burn the whole place," he muttered, working the lever of his Winchester with deliberate calm. Another shot cracked out, dropping a rider who had come too close with another torch. Inside, Taya felt the cabin tremble with the force of panic outside. The flames roared louder, illuminating her bronze skin and the sharp edges of her features. Sweat trickled down her temple, but her hands did not falter as she reloaded the carbine. The dog barked frantically, leaping at the door as if to charge the flames itself. Taya moved to hold it back, but a shadow loomed in the firelight before she could act. Jeb Mullen. He strode into the yard, towering, scarred, an axe gleaming in his grip. Firelight danced across his twisted grin. "Time's up, Ward," he bellowed. "Hand her over, or I'll split you both in two." Elias stepped forward onto the porch, rifle steady. His gray eyes locked on the brute, cold and resolute. "You'll have to try." Jeb swung the axe down on the fence post with a thunderous crack, wood splintered, sparks flying. He advanced step by step, each strike sending echoes through the night like a war drum. The other raiders circled, their guns held ready, but their eyes fixed on the monstrous figure leading them. Taya's heart hammered in her chest. She had seen men like Jeb before, living storms of violence, built for destruction. For a moment, the mocking voices of her past returned, whispering that she was too strange, too strong, never fit for a woman. Yet now, watching him charge through the fire, she understood. Her strength was not a curse. It was the only thing standing between them and death. She gripped her knife tighter, its blade catching the fire's reflection, and whispered a silent vow. Elias fired again, the bullet sparking off Jeb's axe head as he raised it like a shield. The brute roared, unshaken, and stormed closer, his massive frame a silhouette against the burning barn. The cattle shrieked louder, bursting through broken stalls, flooding into the yard in a storm of hooves and fear. Smoke, fire, and fury collided, turning the quiet ranch into a battlefield. And in the center of it all, Jeb came for them, an axe raised high, the fire painting him in the colors of hell itself. The yard blazed like a furnace, smoke twisting through the night as the cattle thundered past in blind panic. Amid the chaos, Jeb Mullen stormed forward, axe raised, his shadow huge against the burning barn. His roar cut through the gunfire, a sound more beast than man. Elias fired, but Jeb twisted sideways, the bullet grazing his arm. He barreled through the yard, swinging his axe downward with a force that split the porch railing in two. Wood exploded into splinters. Elias staggered back, rifle knocked from his hands. Before Jeb could strike again, Taya moved. Knife flashing in the firelight, she lunged with a speed that startled even herself. The blade swept close to his throat, forcing him to jerk back. His grin widened, savage and eager. "Well now," he growled, circling her,
The giant woman wants to play. Their bodies collided in a storm of fury. Jeb swung the axe in brutal arcs, each blow enough to shatter bone if it landed. Taya ducked low, rolling across the dirt, her knife slashing at his side. Steel met flesh. He grunted as blood streaked down his ribs, but the wound only fueled his rage. He caught her arm in his massive hand, squeezing until her knuckles cracked. She snarled, driving her knee upward into his gut. The brute staggered, air bursting from his lungs, but he swung again, the axe blade tearing a line across her shoulder. Pain seared white-hot. Taya roared, the sound primal, echoing through the valley. She locked her arms around his neck, dragging him off balance. They crashed into the dirt, rolling in a brutal grapple. His fists rained down like hammers, splitting her lip, bruising her ribs. But her strength, long mocked and cursed, rose up like a shield. She held him, fought him, endured every strike. Elias tried to move in, but another attacker fired from the shadows, forcing him back behind cover. It was Taya's fight now. Blood streaked her face, her knife clattered away in the struggle, but she refused to yield. Her fingers clawed for Jeb's axe, ripping it from his grip in a desperate surge. She swung the haft upward, smashing it into his jaw. He reeled, spitting blood and broken teeth. For a heartbeat, the fire painted them like warriors from some older age, two giants locked in a dance of survival. Taya's chest heaved, every breath burning. She had been told all her life that her size, her strength, her very being was a curse. But here, in the crucible of fire and blood, it was salvation. She shoved Jeb to the ground, her hands tightening around the haft of the axe, ready to end it. But the fight was not yet over. Jeb snarled, dragging her down with him, and the battle raged on, brutal, close, and merciless, until only one would stand. The world narrowed to fire and blood. Taya straddled Jeb, her powerful arms locked around his throat as he thrashed beneath her. His scarred face twisted with hate, spittle flying as he gasped for air. The firelight painted her features in bronze and crimson, sweat and blood streaking together until she seemed less woman than warrior risen from the desert itself. Her knife lay within reach. With one swift motion she seized it, the blade glinting inches from Jeb's neck. Her breath came in ragged bursts, every muscle trembling with fury. All the voices of her past surged inside her. Caleb's laughter at the station, the townsfolk's cruel whispers, the child's mocking cry of giant woman. Every insult, every rejection, every scar branded into her heart now found its answer in the brute who writhed beneath her. One thrust, and she would silence them all. Jeb's eyes bulged with fear, his hands clawing at her wrists. "Do it," he rasped. "Prove them right. Show them the savage you are." The words pierced deeper than his blows. Rage burned hotter, her hand tightening on the hilt. For a heartbeat, she saw herself giving in, spilling blood to claim a justice the world had long denied her. Then, another hand touched her shoulder, firm, steady. Elias. His gray eyes met hers through the smoke and flame, unwavering. His voice carried low, rough but clear enough to cut through the roar of her pulse. "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Romans 12:21. The words struck like water against fire. Her grip faltered, breath catching in her chest. She stared down at Jeb, trembling, the knife still poised. But she no longer saw him as victory, only as a broken man drowning in hatred, the same hatred that had haunted her. Slowly, painfully, she drew the blade back. Her chest heaved, tears burning her eyes. With a roar that was half anguish, half defiance, she flung the knife aside. The steel clattered against the dirt, swallowed by the sounds of gunfire and crackling flames. Jeb gasped, shoving weakly against her, but she pressed him back with nothing more than her hands, pinning him without striking the final blow. Her strength, once driven by rage, now held him captive in restraint. Elias crouched beside her, one hand still steady on her shoulder. His presence anchored her, reminding her that mercy was not weakness. It was power greater than any blade. Around them, the raiders faltered, their leader brought low. Their fire met not with savagery, but with something they could not understand, restraint born of courage. Taya rose, chest heaving, leaving Jeb sprawled and broken in the dirt. Her black eyes blazed, not with fury now, but with a fierce light of triumph. She had chosen her own way. For the first time, she was not what others called her. She was what she had decided to be. The yard lay choked in smoke and ash. Gunfire sputtered into silence as the raiders faltered, their confidence shattered. Jeb groaned in the dirt, blood streaking his arm, his breath ragged. Above him stood Taya, tall and unbroken, her chest heaving but her gaze fierce and steady. From the shadows near the corral, Emery Granger emerged at last. His hat was gone, his face slick with sweat. He had hidden while others bled, and now he stared in disbelief at the sight before him. His hired brute sprawled at the feet of the woman he had once mocked, the ranch still standing against fire and lead. This isn't over," he stammered, voice shaking. "She was mine." Elias leveled the Winchester, smoke curling from its barrel. His gray eyes were cold as iron. "She never belonged to you." The words struck harder than any bullet. Emery's mouth opened, but no reply came. Murmurs rippled through the surviving men, scorn, disgust. Their leader was revealed not as a master, but a coward. One by one, they melted into the night, leaving him standing alone in the fire's glow. Emery's eyes darted, searching for support that no longer remained. Finally, he turned and fled, stumbling into the darkness, his pride more broken than any bone. The man who had sought to own her was now nothing more than a shadow cast out by his own shame. Jeb tried to rise, but pain dragged him back to the dirt. He spat blood, glaring up at Taya. For a moment, he expected the blade to finish what it had begun, but she did not move to strike. Her silence cut deeper than steel, mercy that mocked his cruelty. "Go," Elias said, his voice like stone grinding against stone. "Leave this valley and don't return." Defeated, Jeb staggered away, clutching his wounds, vanishing into the smoke with what little pride he still carried. The ranch smoldered. Flames had chewed the barn roof, leaving blackened beams jutting into the night sky like bones. Fences lay broken, cattle scattered, the yard scarred by hoofprints and blood. Yet the cabin still stood. Its walls were singed, windows shattered, but its heart, the hearth, the table, the Bible resting upon it, remained. Taya stood in the center of the yard, her shoulders broad and strong, her knife lying unused at her feet. The firelight reflected in her black eyes, but for once they were not clouded with shame or fury. They were clear, steady, filled with something new. Elias stepped beside her, his arm brushing hers. Neither spoke. Words were too small for what the night had cost and what it had given. Instead, they looked together at the ruin and the survival, at the home that still endured against the odds. The dog limped from the porch, wagging its tail weakly before curling at their feet. Above, the stars pierced through smoke, silver against black, eternal witnesses to a night of fire and mercy. For the first time, Taya did not feel cast out or alone. She had fought, she had endured, and she had chosen a path of her own.
And in that choice, she had found something stronger than vengeance. She had found belonging. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. Dawn broke slow and heavy over Dry Creek. Smoke still curled from the barn's blackened rafters, the yard strewn with broken timbers and spent shells. The air carried the acrid sting of fire, but beneath it came the softer scent of earth cooling after rain. Against all odds, the cabin still stood, scarred but alive. Elias moved with the calm focus of a man who had known loss before. He carried charred beams away from the barn, stacking them in neat piles. Each movement was measured, steady, as though restoring order one plank at a time might drive back the chaos of the night. His hands were blistered, his shoulders heavy, but he did not complain. Taya worked beside him, her tall frame bending to lift timbers Elias could not manage alone. Her wounds ached, her shoulder bandaged, but she refused to falter. Sweat mixed with soot across her bronze skin, and her dark eyes held no trace of shame now, only resolve. With every beam she carried, every fence post she set back in place, she declared silently that she belonged here. By midday, the worst of the ruins were cleared. The cattle had returned from the hills, their lowing voices filling the valley once more. The dog limped through the yard, tail wagging weakly, as though reminding them both that life, however battered, endured. That evening, Elias sat on the porch with his pipe, watching the horizon burn red with sunset. Taya joined him, lowering herself onto the step beside him. The silence stretched, not heavy now, but companionable. She glanced toward the cabin window, where the Bible still rested on the table inside. Her voice came low, halting. "Last night, I nearly became what they always called me, savage, monster." Elias turned his gaze to her, his gray eyes steady. "No, you chose different. That's what matters." The words settled in her chest, a weight and a balm at once. She had lived her whole life under the shadow of others' names. Now, for the first time, she felt she was writing her own. In town, the story spread fast. Some whispered in disbelief that the Apache woman had stood against Jeb Mullen and lived. Others scoffed, claiming Elias had lost his senses. A few, quietly, began to speak of respect. At the mercantile, when Elias came for nails and flour, heads still turned. But when he walked through the door with Taya at his side, he did not release her hand. And this time, though murmurs rose, no one laughed. The memory of gunfire and firelight still lingered in every mind. Children stared wide-eyed, not with mockery now, but with awe. One boy whispered, "That's her, the woman who fought the giant." Taya heard and felt her cheeks flush, uncertain whether to bow her head or lift it higher. Elias gave her hand a small squeeze. She chose the latter. Back at the ranch, life settled into a rhythm again. The barn would take months to rebuild, the fences longer still, but each day carried progress. Elias repaired the roof, Taya split firewood with sure, steady strikes. She cooked meals, clumsy at first, but improving. He tended her bandaged shoulder, careful hands brushing against her skin with a gentleness that surprised them both. At night, they sat by the fire, sometimes speaking, often not. Words were not needed. The glow of the hearth, the sound of wind against the cabin walls, the shared space between them, all spoke enough. One evening, Taya hummed the old Apache song again, soft as breath. Elias listened in silence, his pipe smoke curling toward the rafters. When she finished, he nodded once. "It belongs here," he said simply. And for the first time, she believed him. Autumn crept over the valley, softening the prairie's harsh edges. The grass turned golden, the air crisp with the promise of winter. At Elias's ranch, life took on a new rhythm, quieter but stronger than before. The barn remained a skeleton of blackened beams, yet its ruin did not feel like defeat. Each day, Taya carried timber, Elias shaping planks, together raising the frame anew. Their hands grew calloused, their backs sore, but laughter sometimes rose between them, startling in its unfamiliarity. Laughter had no place in either of their lives for years. Now it came like a fragile gift, proving that the fire had not only destroyed, but also refined. The townsfolk kept watching. When Elias and Taya came to Dry Creek for supplies, stares still followed, but the sharpness had dulled. Some nodded with the respect owed to survivors. Others looked away, ashamed of their earlier jeers. Children no longer shouted "Giant Woman." They whispered in hushed voices about the night the ranch burned, about how she had fought and spared a man most would have killed. Slowly, grudgingly, the cruel names faded. In their place came something new. Not yet acceptance, perhaps, but the beginning of it.
One crisp morning, the doctor from Prescott arrived at the ranch to check Taya's wounds. He pressed gently along her bandaged shoulder, then leaned back with a small smile. "The scars will mend," he said, "but there is something else." His eyes flicked toward Elias, then back to Taya. "You are with child." For a moment, the words hung in the air, suspended like the hush before rain. Taya's breath caught. She laid a broad, work-worn hand on her belly, as if to confirm what her ears had heard. A storm of emotion swept her, fear, disbelief, and then a warmth so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. Elias sat quiet on the porch step long after the doctor left, pipe unlit in his hand. He stared at the fields, where the cattle grazed under the wide sky. Once he had thought his line ended with the fever that had taken his wife and child. Now a new life stirred in the ashes of grief. His throat tightened, but when Taya sat beside him, he reached for her hand. This time he held it without hesitation. At night, beneath the endless sky, they sat together on the porch. The stars shimmered, vast and uncountable. The dog lay curled at their feet, the cabin's windows glowing with firelight. Taya leaned against Elias's shoulder, one hand resting gently on her stomach. Her voice was low but steady. "I never thought I would live to call any place home." Elias wrapped his arm around her, his silence heavy with meaning. For him, too, the word home had long been a ghost. Now it returned, not in the form of timber and stone, but in the woman beside him, in the child yet to be born, in the choice they had made to stand together. Above them, the stars bore witness. The prairie wind carried a quiet peace, as if even the land itself acknowledged their survival. Elias spoke at last, his voice rough but certain. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. Taya closed her eyes, letting the words settle over her like a prayer. The scars on her body, the fire-blackened ranch, the cruel laughter of the past, all still existed. Yet they no longer defined her. What defined her now was this: a man who stood beside her, a home forged through trial, a child that carried their hope into tomorrow. In the harsh land of the West, no one chose where they were born, but they could choose who they stood with, who they built with, who they called family. And sometimes family shaped by faith, tempered by fire, bound by love, was the greatest treasure a person could ever hold. My friends, perhaps as you listened, you remembered evenings of your own, dusty sunsets, the creak of old wooden steps, or the silence of a house that once held voices now gone. The story of Elias and Taya is not only about the West. It is about each of us who have known loneliness, loss, and the long road toward belonging. Their scars may be different from yours, yet the longing for a place called home is the same. In the harsh lands of the frontier, strength alone was never enough. What endured was love, mercy, and the quiet faith that even in ashes new life can rise. That is why these are not just tales of gunfire and dust. They are true Wild West stories, carrying echoes of the human heart. If this story touched you, I invite you, share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe so that together we can keep these stories alive.